Hey guys, welcome back to the Brik House. Brik in the city here with another Pokemon Unite tier list video. Today we got week 3 for the full power burst patch. Also part 2 that dropped earlier this week, which includes the 7 Pokemon you see in front of you here. We're going to see how this last patch affected these Pokemon, how they move up, where they're going to move down. Also see who's going to be the definitive winner. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And let me know down in the comments who you think is the winner and the loser. Do you think Duraludon's unstoppable bonus is now going to make it capable of keeping up with the competition? Or maybe Ceruledge now with that extra lifesteal is going to be a monster. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. So we're going to start off with Armarouge. Now, Armarouge is a Pokemon that did fairly well during the NAIC, and specifically it was Psyshock that was doing just immense amount of damage. Hit them with the second shot of that Psyshock, there was a lot of damage you were able to stack up on the opponent, which made him such a reliable burst, especially for running those 5-man team comps. So this buff really does seem to aim at his 5v5 competitive viability, not so much as his solo queue viability. However, being said, he is a Pokemon that does tend to go under the radar, being one of the more tankier attackers and actually fairly good during the Rayquaza fights. Armarouge is definitely a Pokemon that could definitely have a couple more eyes on it, and honestly a pretty good pick for anyone looking to try out any attacker. And for this week I'm pretty confident in putting it kind of in between Delphox and Ninetales. He is kind of showing to be one of the better 2-stage evolution Pokemon, and we'll see how he does in these next couple of weeks and if he ends up moving up or down any more positions. So next we're going to move on to Duraludon, who got a pretty substantial buff this patch. Now, Duraludon had a buff to its Dragon Pulse, an 8% increase to its damage, as well as a cooldown reduction upon getting these KOs, going from 10% to 30%. So a third increase on that, which is pretty substantial. If you played Duraludon since these last buffs, you've definitely noticed a better Pokemon. So Duraludon got a pretty substantial buff in the sense that its Unite move, Revolving Ruin, now has the added effect of giving it unstoppable. Its Unite move could be shut down fairly easily during any crucial moments, especially during if you're playing against a fairly competent team. And so this buff really gives him that reliability that he once didn't have, and honestly a bit surprising that, you know, he was able to be taken out of that Unite move for so long. So very welcoming change over here, and these changes are honestly enough to kind of carry him out of the bricked position and putting him at the top of the could use a buff tier. So it does mean that Cramorant was forced to move down to the last place tier because of these recent buffs, and it did really give Duraludon a nice glow up. There's also been a new emergence of Duraludon going in the center lane, which is very welcoming. It's very welcoming having a lot of viable characters that can jungle, especially in the attacker role, since it's so hard to kind of get ahead in these solo queue games. So hopefully we can see some more Duraludon jungles and kind of see where he goes from here. So moving on, we are going to go to the all-rounders, and to start us off we have Ceruledge. Now Ceruledge has also gotten a pretty substantial buff, and honestly in my opinion I think he benefited the most out of this recent patch. Definitely a Pokemon to watch out for, especially during these Rayquaza fights, being that his Bitter Blade has a 50% recovery effect, and now it goes up to 70% at Bitter Blade Plus. So once you get to those higher levels, level 11, level 12, you're going to be doing so much damage and being able to heal a lot of that back, giving him a lot of opportunity to survive in like these 1v3 team fights. However, they also gave him some damage reduction on the Unite move Revenant Ren, going from 50% to 70%. Getting a Unite move off in the middle of a team fight was pretty difficult with Ceruledge earlier. However, now it's going to be easier to get those attackers that you should be targeting essentially in the middle of that team fight and not take too much damage. Essentially 2/3 of the damage, more than 2/3 of the damage is now going to be negated after this patch. So we're going from half the damage negated to over 2/3 of the damage negated. So honestly a very welcoming for any Ceruledge mains out there, and something that can definitely take him to a very solid pick. I think for this week, we can comfortably put him right above Mimikyu. It's definitely being played a lot in these recent games. Wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you guys have ran into or played with a lot of Ceruledge. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you guys have played with and against a lot of Ceruledges since his last patch. And it'll be interesting to see if he can become that de facto all-rounder. That does leave our S tier must-play spot to Blaziken once again for this week. Now, Blaziken was in these recent patch notes, and the early game to mid game has been nerfed pretty substantially with Blaziken. So, Blaziken had got a 12% damage decrease to its Fire Punch, as well as its shield amount with its Unite move going down from 12% down to 9%. So, Blaziken was able to easily 1v3, 1v4, even 1v5 teams very early on in the game. And this nerf kind of addresses that portion of Blaziken. So, as soon as you got level 8, level 9, you got your Unite move running. At that point, you were just kind of very scary to deal with. And now with this damage increase, you're not going to be life stealing as much, and that shield you're going to be getting is going to scale throughout the game. So because it's percent of your max HP, at level 8 or level 9, you're not going to have as much as you will at level like 12, level 13, where you will get substantially more HP when you level up as Blaziken. It's a nice nerf, a really good starting point for kind of getting him more in line with these other attackers. I think it's okay for Blaziken to be such a menace in this late game, such a great option for trying to get any Rayquaza steals. However, it should definitely come with a trade-off as a pretty weak early game, and currently it's a Pokemon that does evolve 3 times. It really doesn't feel like that, and it's still fairly easy to get Blaziken up and running as long as you can get a good laning phase up going, and get all your attack weight stacks fairly quickly. That the game is still essentially going to revolve around that Blaziken pick. So very comfortable on leaving Blaziken still at the top of the S tier for this week. Definitely took the biggest hit from the nerfs, I would say, but still not enough. And that's going to be it for the all-rounders for this week. So let's move on to the only speedster impacted by this patch, being Leafeon, with a buff to its Solar Blade. Every damage range is increasing up to 10% depending on the charge time, as well as some buffs to its Leaf Blade. Its cooldown going from 9 seconds to 8.5 seconds, which is very small but can be noticeable throughout the game, as well as that Chlorophyll Gauge increasing 20% faster, which will really be noticeable and help you get those early game ganks off going. So Leafeon is definitely one of those speedsters that is going to excel very, very well in the early game, but kind of teeter off in the late game. And these buffs kind of address the Solar Blade build, which was a bit weaker than the Leaf Blade build in that regard. So it's something that is, I think, again, a good start for Leafeon. However, ever since those nerfs to the penetration, Leafeon's been kind of struggling on finding a consistent role to play, as in terms of a solo queue games being such a high value target, as well as a fairly predictable assassin when compared to other species like Zoroark or Dodrio. I think it's definitely going to stay at the middle of could use a buff. I would definitely love to see some HP or defense on Leafeon to kind of help it survive in that later portion of the game, or even maybe some more experimenting with the penetration stat. So lastly, we're going to have our supports, and the first one we're going to go through is Blissey. Now Blissey is the last Pokemon on our list to get a nerf from this last patch, and it is a fairly minor nerf, I would have to say, actually. So it had a nerf to its Safeguard with a shield amount going down by 10%, as well as a 1 second increase to its cooldown, so from 9 seconds to 10 seconds. So it's definitely going to have Blissey using Safeguard less frequently, which is definitely a game-changing move. A move I do complain about pretty routinely if you ever watch my streams. Definitely a really welcoming change. However, something that doesn't really address the bigger issues I'd say that Blissey has, mainly being Bliss Assistance being such a game-changing Unite move. So it's definitely some nerfs that can help keep Blissey in line. However, just like Blaziken, I would really like to see some more nerfs on this Pokemon, and maybe even some buffs on some of his competition to kind of give more variety on these supporters. So for this week, Blissey will be going back up to the top of the tier list at the must play tier. Also, because of all these changes, has been banned a lot less recently, so definitely a Pokemon you're going to be able to pick up and play a lot more often as opposed to a week prior. So last on our tier list, we have Alcremie. And Alcremie is in competition for getting the best buffs from this last patch. And a very needed emergency buff, I would have to say. It's not really saying that Alcremie was in like a terrible position before, but when you just gotta compare it to his competition being, you know, Clefable or mainly Blissey, it was just such a clear distinction between the two roles. But now Alcremie is seemingly carving out a very important niche on some team comps, and is very welcoming seeing a support like this that is such a high value target to take out during a team fight. So the buffs that we saw in Alcremie have to do with its HP, defense, and special defense, all going up pretty substantially throughout the game, as well as its charm damage, so it's level 1 move essentially, level 1 to 5 move. Max range is going up, making it a much more reliable move on securing those last hits. Sweet Scent has also gotten a buff, which is move startup time reduced, making it much easier to get those Pokemon who you're trying to chase down or helping the CC chain in those fights, as well as buffs to its Recover, which is very, very substantial. If you play an attacker and you've gotten any recovers, if you've taken a recover cake from an Alcremie recently, you will definitely notice that just 1 or 2 can bring you back up to full health, and you can just keep going back in. So it's a bit hard to kind of run into them in the middle of a team fight, but if you can play around them effectively, they are definitely going to change that game dramatically. Alcremie then has also gotten a buff on its Decorate, where it's now going to be able to get a shield when decorating an ally. So kind of weird that it didn't get a shield earlier. It won't deal any additional damage, but it is nice having that little bit of extra shielding, and you know, not as much as a decision if you're gonna, you know, decorate yourself or decorate an ally just for the shield. So now it's a very welcoming change, and something that probably should have been on the Pokemon at the launch. Lastly, the last buff that Alcremie got was to its Unite move, Fluffy Cream Supreme, with a HP recovery increase of 25%, a shield amount going from 20% to 30% of its max HP after the move ends, as well as a movement speed increase from 30% to 40% after the move ends. And again, something very noticeable, going to make it a lot easier to kind of protect your teammates who kind of stray away from the Unite move, go and protect them or give them that damage boost. And I feel very comfortable on putting Alcremie in the top of the solid pick tier, just under Psyduck right now. I definitely want to see how Alcremie performs in these next couple weeks, if it ends up doing better or worse than these other Pokemon, if it ends up being a Pokemon that stays in the meta or falls into more of like a niche category. You know, maybe if Blissey's banned, then it becomes the next best pick. So very interested to see how the community kind of plays around this Pokemon. And that will do it for this week's tier list for Search for the Best. So a bit of movement that went on throughout here, a bit in the bottom, and it seems the nerfs to Blaziken and Blissey weren't enough to kind of take them off of their must play tier. However, you know, those buffs that Ceruledge, Duraludon, even Alcremie got have very boosted it in this tier list, and I'm very interested to see how these guys perform in these next couple of weeks, and again, how this community kind of performs around them. So that's going to be it for me for this week. Let me know down in the comments, if any of these kind of surprised you, or if you agree with any of these decisions. Definitely really like to see some more buffs to Leafeon, maybe to even this other moveset as well. You know, it's a Pokemon I really do enjoy playing, but a Pokemon I really can see the flaws in when playing in a solo queue game. So hopefully some more substantial buffs can come in the future for Leafeon. Anyways, I've been Brik in the City. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. And until next time, guys, stay nasty.